If you, as Jeffrey Bucher said, you regard television as being both legacy and digital, the cake is expanding. That is true, and traditional TV is maintaining its share, for older people like myself, if you like. But if you look at the pattern of behavior of younger people, and particularly not just in the US, but in the markets that have not got legacy structures, a China and an India, where they are leapfrogging from traditional television. They're not going through a PC phase, but they're going straight to mobile. So mobile is the cheap form of access to the internet, as smartphones, which can download television. And people can watch programs on. You may not like smaller screens, but tablets give you the opportunity to watch it. The viewing habits are changing. And I think that there's a danger that those people who run legacy companies like us underestimate the impact of those changes, particularly when things are going okay. Time Warner have record results, Bertelsmann have record results, we have record results. Everything is hunky-dory. I mean, the fact is that the volume growth and the revenue growth is modest. A lot of what we're seeing is achieved by looking at costs, but there are changes in the consumption of media which are so fundamental, particularly in the younger age groups. I think that we just have to make in thinking about the future, we have to take that into consideration. Consumers will have to pay for content through subscription, or content will have to be subsidized by advertising on any of all these platforms. The problem is that new platforms are being created all the time. We touched on House of Cards, which we own a piece of Media Rights Capital, which was the production company for House of Cards, which was distributed on Netflix, and that's partly the reason why I asked the question in the first place. So we're starting to look at the alternatives in our industry as to the way things are distributed and the alternative platforms. And our role, managing the $70 billion of media that we manage, is to make sure, if you look at it as being one client, that it's the right number and it's carved up and invested in the right way. So this is exactly the same thing as a fund manager like BlackRock, was what I mentioned. It does in advising clients on how much they should invest and in which media. And of course, as things become more fragmented, just like in the investment area, our role becomes more important, deciding between the different media. Well, if I went back 10 years, probably 15 years, digital, if you can segment it, and it is true, some people in our industry say it's very difficult to segment it, and it is, because you could say everything is digital. I could say 100% of the revenue is digital, but when we look at what is really chiefly digital, it's 34%. Our numbers come out tomorrow, and you'll see that underlined in the statement. That didn't exist 10 or 15 years ago. So we've made a major shift. We'd like it to be certainly 35, 40, 45%, and it's growing each year. This year it grew by about 3% from 31% in the first quarter, because we made acquisitions as well as grew organically. So it moves at least by 1% a year. So next year it will be 35% at least, and then we'll grow from that level if we make acquisitions. So it's organic growth and it's growth by acquisition. But it acknowledges that our traditional businesses have to be digital, that our Forrester digital leaders, and we have 4 out of 7, that's Ogilvy One, Wunderman, VML, AKQA, that they have to do even better. And last but not least, as we act as a sort of strategic venture capitalist or private equity house that takes investments like we did in Buddy Media, like we did in Omniture, like we do in Vice, like we've done in SFX, that we make these investments, or Media Rights Capital, we make these investments that are interesting to our clients in the longer term. So it's a 3-pronged strategy. Part of it is the cannibalization argument. If you don't eat your children, somebody else will. So you have to move on. But it's certainly an attempt to try and get the company to adapt to the sort of changes we talk, those TV changes, or the need to increase our investment in internet and mobile and reduce our investment in newspapers and magazines. That's another big shift in terms of consumer use and consumer time versus where we're investing. The sort of investments that we're really interested in is our traditional clients inside companies have been CEOs, but we tend to deal with CMOs, Chief Marketing Officers. Increasingly post-Lehman, because finance function has become more important, it's been finance and procurement. Now, because clients are looking at the platforms, the technology platforms, marketing platforms, IT platforms and structures inside their companies and are trying to get the same platform, common platforms, we're starting to get very much involved with the CIOs and CTOs, Chief Technology Officers and Chief Information Officers. So we're not just madmen, we're maths men as well. And uniting those two things, I think, is the critically important change. So anything that in the marketing area gets us closer to the CIOs and the CTOs as well as the CMOs is somewhere where we're going. And there's a big discussion certainly in the trade journals as to who will control the IT purse or the marketing budget. Will it be the CMO or the CIO or the CTO? I don't know where that will come out. What we have to do is to appeal to both. Google sells Google. Very successfully. I mean, they are a frenemy, but they're a friendly frenemy than they were before. Facebook sells Facebook. I think that is more a branding medium than an advertising medium, but that's a controversial thing to say. Twitter, I think that's a PR medium, not a branding medium, or a branding medium, but not an advertising medium. Now that's highly controversial, but I believe that to be the case. I mean, they're both in the case of Facebook and Twitter. I think the pressures of IPOs or pending IPOs sort of force them to focus on monetization, I think, too rapidly and a little bit unrealistically. I think they should just relax. I mean, Facebook is a brilliant platform. It touches 1 billion people on the planet. It will be the largest nation on the planet. It will surpass the Chinese population at some point in time. Twitter is growing in depth, and things like Pinterest, I mean, there's discussion as to whether that's lost some of its momentum or Instagram has lost some of it, but basically all these vehicles are going to be very important in one way or another. But the urge to monetize, which is driven by VCs, private equity houses, investment banks, I mean, I think just relax and see how the consumer adapts. And the context of all this is very important. Search is very different to social. That is very different to a Twitter-type medium, and I think you have to look at it in the right context. Well, Google has 5 legs in my mind. It obviously has search, it has display, it has YouTube and video, it has social, Google+, and it has mobile. And of course it acquired Motorola Mobility, which is not just hardware but software, and it has the Android platform. So I think it's in a phenomenally strong position, and as I said in answer to that question about Brussels, there are only 2 things I think that can stop Google. One is that the problems of running a bigger and bigger company. They're already, 4th or 5th largest company by market cap in the world at 260 billion or whatever it is. And the second thing is regulation. Because the question that was asked was, was there more regulation coming in the EU? And it does seem that the EU is taking a slightly different attitude to the Americans and the FCC and the FTC in terms of regulation of Google. But Google is the force. I mean, it is already our 2nd largest media relationship and could very quickly become our biggest. It's still a golden age, I wouldn't disagree with that, but we mustn't become complacent about it. The fact that things appear to be going well, appear to be adapting well, maybe share prices at all-time highs and profits at all-time highs and margins, etc., shouldn't lull us into a full sense of security. If you look at the consumption, even of television, in all its forms, both old and new, it is changing. And I think you have to be paranoid. It doesn't cost you anything to be paranoid, I don't think. You have to be paranoid. You have to be willing to make changes. You have to be willing to push your people to move faster, and you have to be willing to experiment and if necessary, fail, whatever the punishment that is meted out for failing. And you have to do that, because I'm just a little bit nervous that we're becoming a little bit too complacent. It is true. I mean, 5-10 years ago, analysts would say, 5 years ago, WPP will fail because of the G word, the Google world, right? Then after Lehman, it was the R word, the recession word. Well, we managed to weather the recession, pretty well. We managed to forge a very good relationship, I think, with Google and indeed other potential disintermediators. That doesn't mean there aren't going to be others. And I just think my sense is, complacency is creeping in and it should be out. So, just keep paranoid.